After nearly 20 years in charge of the Gaza Strip, Hamas has announced that its government will be dissolved. The move is seen as a major political shift for the Palestinian militant group, which is widely designated a terrorist organization. The Palestinian Technocratic Committee, which was set up by Donald Trump's Board of Peace, now says that it is ready to govern the war-ravaged territory. A ceasefire between Hamas and Israel took effect last October, but the question of Gaza's post-war governance is still a sticking point in negotiations. And we're joined by DW correspondent Tanya Kramer. So Hamas is dissolving its de facto government. What changes on the ground now in Gaza?
Well, I think most people in Gaza would see it more as a political move or even a symbolic move by Hamas, although they have said, and this is part of the key elements of this 20-point plan that was agreed upon in October 2025, this ceasefire agreement, which has stalled ever since. But what Hamas has said basically today, that it is actually to dismantle its emergency government committee that's overseeing, those institutions and ministries that are still working, although most of them in a limited capacity. It also has said that all the civil servants that are actually working in those institutions and ministries will continue to work for the time being in those institutions. So we don't expect, while they're saying they will not continue to oversee this, we do not expect major changes right now on the ground for the people there in Gaza. I mean, they are living still in very dire conditions because of the stalled ceasefire talks. I mean, there have been several rounds of talks in Cairo between Hamas and Israel with the mediators. So it's basically seen as some sort of political move now by Hamas to somehow move this forward. But, the main issues are still there that have not been solved. For example, the decommissioning of Hamas weapons or the withdrawal of the Israeli forces. Now, we heard from the Board of Peace that's overseeing the whole process, their reaction was somehow maybe a bit subdued. They said they've taken note, but they will assess and be guided now by the actions. We heard from the High Representative, Nikolai Mladenov, who said that, this is just basically indicating this is just one of the main issues that needs to be solved to have a comprehensive, to move forward with this roadmap. And we also heard from the, you mentioned them, the National Committee, the Technocratic Committee. I mean, they're ready to go into Gaza. They have not been allowed by Israel to go into Gaza, but they have stated again, to be able to work, they need to be under one authority, one law, as they put it, and one weapon to be able to work.
How much pressure is Israel under now to enable the next steps now in Trump's peace plan? And you referenced it a little bit there. We're talking about the Committee of Technocrats, which is due now to take over the running of Gaza.
Well, so far we have no indication whether the committee is actually being allowed by Israel to move to Gaza and to take up their work. They have been working mainly out of Cairo, and we have at the moment no indication that this will change anytime soon. And, this has to do with, that the broader, all the other issues, and one of the main sticking point, at least from the point of view of the Board of Peace, but also from Israel, is the disarmament of Hamas. And both sides actually have blamed each other for violating this ceasefire agreement. And in the meantime, Israel has basically also widened its hold over the territory. We heard Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that Israel is holding currently or occupying 60% of the Gaza Strip, and that he has ordered the military to take up to 70%, basically pushing the people of Gaza in an ever-shrinking space. So you can see there is a lot, that has still to be done. So this is, one of the steps, but, there is a lot of other parts of this agreement that needs to be implemented.
And Tanya, you know, you mentioned the ambiguity when it comes to the disarmament of Hamas. They've made no mention of disarmament. In fact, this is really seen as the linchpin for getting the ceasefire plan to move forward, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think, you know, there have been several rounds in Cairo with the mediators, with Qatar, Egypt, of course, you know, the Board of Peace overseeing this, the High Representative being there, Nikolai Mladenov, holding those rounds of talks. Also, Turkey is somehow involved, and this is one of the main issues. But I have to say, you know, both sides have been blaming each other for not implementing this ceasefire. But, you know, the other issues that are not clear yet where this is going, for example, the International Stabilization Force, when they would come in and take over, you know, those parts that then the army would have to withdraw from. And, you know, for people in Gaza, the question is, when will there be a change on the ground? For example, Reconstruction, nothing has happened. I mean, they have been really, you know, living in hardship. We're talking about a ceasefire that was agreed upon in October 2025, but you know, from the health ministry in Gaza, they're saying that over 1,000 people have been killed. There are still also attacks and airstrikes in Gaza. And of course, there's no way, you know, there's no sense for people there to see any solution for them on the horizon right now.
Tanya Kramer, thank you.
Our next guest is Ahmed Fouad Al-Hatib. He's an activist and the director of Realign for Palestine. That's an Atlantic Council project that advocates for a two-state solution and a non-violent pro-Palestine discourse. He grew up in Gaza City and left the territory in 2005. Ahmed, welcome to DW. Now, this sounds significant, but what does it mean in practical terms? Will Hamas really give up the day-to-day governance of Gaza?
On its surface, it sounds like a significant development, but as of now, I doubt that this is anything beyond a ruse by Hamas to signal that it is in fact compromising, when all indications point to the group maintaining its cadre of administrative personnel. That's both the medical, educational, and security personnel. Hamas has no real intention of disarming or relinquishing control. What Hamas is desperate for is something akin to the Hezbollah model in Lebanon, whereby the group reigns, but it doesn't rule. As of now, all that this announcement has been backed up by is the resignation of the head of the group's emergency committee, which is basically what Hamas has reduced its governing apparatus to, this committee post October 7th. But it remains to be seen whether or not subsequent actions by the group will be taken to actually bolster this announcement.
Mm-hmm. What do you think was the motivation behind this announcement from Hamas? Why are we seeing this now?
Well, last week we had the meeting, a serious meeting in Cyprus with the Board of Peace members, the executive committee. We had some representatives from donor nations there. The United States was present there. And so there's growing pressure to see what becomes of, now that the war in Iran is for the time being receding from headlines. There's renewed interest in Gaza. And people are looking at the Board of Peace and what little has actually been accomplished. They're looking at the humanitarian conditions. They're looking at the escalation of violence. Israel is continuing to assassinate Hamas members and militants. Hamas is continuing to go after Gazans it suspects of opposing its rule and attempting to undermine it. And so we're seeing destabilization across Gaza politically and from a security point of view. And that's where I think Hamas feels compelled to give something up in a desperate attempt to prevent the return of war, and also to not fall out of favor, if you will, with mediators who've been so far, I would say, supportive of the group's position, like maybe Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar.
Mm-hmm. It was Benjamin Netanyahu's stated goal to destroy Hamas after October 7th. Now, there has been a shaky ceasefire in place in Gaza for 9 months. The violence, of course, has not disappeared from the territory. Give us a sense of how much control Hamas still has over Gaza.
Well, tragically and regrettably, Hamas is very much so in control. And I have immediate and extended family members. I have an army of contacts throughout the Gaza Strip. And we just have to think of what happened 10 days ago when there was an attempt to hold a massive anti-Hamas rally, calling on the group to relinquish control so that we can have the Reconstruction commencement, so that we can have NCAG, that is the Technocratic Committee, taken over, so that we can have the initiation of transformation and the transitional period in Gaza to restore some resemblance of life and begin the long road to recovery. And Hamas quickly suppressed all of that. And I think that's just a small sign of how the group maintains control over the population. Then we've seen reports of the group actually being able to, and these are Israeli intelligence assessments and that of Western countries and cables, some of which I've actually been able to see, talking about the repairing of tunnels, the reconstruction of some of the workshops that are preparing for the next round of confrontation with the state of Israel. And so there are concerning signs that we're merely at a stalemate now, all these months after the ceasefire, with no sign on the horizon of any true transition beyond the actual state of war that we've seen since October 7th.
Hamas called their announcement a positive step forward on the path to implement the ceasefire deal. You call it a ruse. Israel says, you know, without disarmament, this means nothing to us. Do you think we will see more steps towards the implementation of the peace deal?
Well, I certainly hope so, for the sake of the Palestinian people in Gaza, for the sake of stability, for the sake of the region, for the sake of progress. It remains to be seen. I mean, the indications that I have is that there really is no serious effort or commitment by Hamas to take steps to disarm. It's kind of like, think of it like, can you have olive oil without using olives? Can there ever be Hamas without weapons or arms? The answer to me is absolutely not. There cannot be Hamas without the armed resistance narrative, backed by the existence of some level of weaponry that it can use to both challenge Israel, but also, let's be frank, to assert dominance over a certain segment of Palestinian society that want to embrace a nonviolent diplomatic and political pathway. And so the concern is that this step, this announcement, is going to be like many before it. This is where it's important for people to keep in mind, is that during the war and well before October 7th, there have been arguably dozens of similar announcements whereby Hamas announced that it's going to relinquish control to the West Bank-based Palestinian Authority, and only for those to end up being empty declarations. And so my concern is that if this is not rapidly either followed up by actions or by the external players in the region holding Hamas accountable and demanding robust action, this is going to be yet another empty declaration, or, like I said, a ruse to grab international headlines. I've been seeing endless headlines of Hamas has given up control of Gaza. Hamas is announcing that it's surrendering control of Gaza. And perhaps that in and of itself was actually Hamas's goal, is to produce these headlines that then the pro-Hamas narrative can recycle and say, look, we're not the obstacle. Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu are. And while Netanyahu is certainly not a helpful player in this game, ultimately, I think at this very point, the responsibility rests on Hamas as far as the billions that need to flow into Gaza for reconstruction and the introduction of this technocratic committee as the transitional authority.
You mentioned mediating countries. Could they seize this as a window of opportunity to say, okay, now let's push for real progress, really put all their leverage on the table and say, we want this to move forward, we want to see this deal implemented, and if so, what should that look like?
Well, what's interesting is that even those mediators, someone like the Trump administration or like other players, have to also put a little bit of pressure on the mediators. And we must remember that it was basically the Trump administration that worked closely with Qatar, but also placed some pressure on Qatar to rein Hamas in near October 2025, and that's when we ended up getting the deal that resulted in the release of all Israeli hostages, the ceasefire, and the first phase. And so it is my hope now that President Trump is going to meet with President Erdogan of Turkey, and now that President Trump is looking back at Gaza and is not wanting to squander the political capital he invested there, that he can pick up the phone and actually meet in person with President Sisi of Egypt, with the Qatari Emir, and with President Erdogan, and say, I need you to exercise maximum leverage and pressure on Hamas as the parties, the three nations that have demonstrably shown your ability to communicate with Hamas and produce results. To me, in the short term, that's the only hope that we have of these mediators being able to have any real leverage.
And I want to quote something you said on X a couple of days ago. Hamas must be dismantled on every front: political, military, financial, and social. I want to know from you, before I let you go, how big a factor is reconciliation between Palestinians and Israelis in that process?
Well, and this is one of the challenge. I mean, before we even, I'll get to that in a second, real quick. But there has to also be internal reconciliation among the Palestinians themselves. And I'm not talking about PA and Hamas. I'm talking about how Hamas, for 2 decades now in Gaza, has created just fissures among the Palestinian society that are in need of healing, in need of repairs. Then you add to it the political dimension with the Palestinian Authority and the other Palestinian factions. And then, of course, you add the dimension of the irreparable damage that Hamas did to the Palestinian legitimate aspirations for independence, for freedom from the Israeli military occupation, for statehood, for self-determination, and how Hamas weakened the case for Palestinian independence among large segments of the Israeli public. The Israelis who lived along the Gaza border, the so-called Gaza envelope communities that were deeply harmed on October 7th, some of whom I knew personally, some of whom helped when my dad, who was an UNRWA doctor in Gaza and he passed away, they helped my family members access medical care. These are good people that were harmed unnecessarily as part of a despicable terror attack, really. And so beyond the politics and the narrative of Israel and Palestine, real people were hurt, certainly on the Palestinian side, and I lost family members, but also on the Israeli side. And I've met many Israelis who want to build cultural bridges, who want to actually reconcile, not as kumbaya, let's hold hands and everything is going to be fine, but to do the hard work that complements the policy work. And that's where I think some of the work that I'm doing at Realign for Palestine and some of the advocacy work complements a lot of the policy work that I'm doing in DC.
Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib, thank you so much for all those insights and your time today.
Thank you.